Hello and welcome from me, Jenny Devitt, to the final episode of the BV podcast for 2025. And it's been a mixed old year, hasn't it? One in which Dorset and the rest of the country was hit by a prolonged drought and now by seemingly endless wet days. However, what better excuse than to stay indoors and hear a small selection of some of the topics covered this December in the BV magazine. We'll hear from farmer George Hosford, from beekeeper Ian Condon, from the Dorset grumbler of 1874, well, it could be that that's a figment of editor Laura's imagination, who knows, and finally we'll hear from Jill Cook about a special place for homeless young people in West Dorset. That will all be coming up after we hear from editor Laura.
It has been a year, hasn't it? Not the triumphant hurrah kind, more the head down, keep plodding, is it bedtime yet sort of year. Whether you're a farmer battling the weather and the government, in hospitality and wondering where the customers are and the tax money is coming from, a local journalist trying to keep the lights on, or simply doing your best to pay the heating bill, 2025 has not been gentle for most of us. But we have all made it, just about. And as we shuffle slightly frayed and biscuit-fueled into December, I'll admit I am tired, possibly delirious, almost definitely weepy. Classic FM keeps ambushing me with Somewhere in My Memory from Home Alone. It's frankly a cheap shot when you haven't seen your eldest child in over a year. But he and his wife will be home in just 10 days. We'll have a full nest for Christmas. We really will have all of the music, all of the magic, and all of the family home here with me. Nope, weepy again, definitely need more sleep. But even as we're winding down for Christmas, we are winding up behind the scenes. We've got big, exciting things planned for 2026 at BV Towers, and no, we can't share them yet. But I want to. Just know we are already plotting and scribbling and quietly fizzing with anticipation. Until then, we are officially now off duty. We don't do the fake, we're still monitoring emails nonsense. The office door is shut, the mince pies are out, the wine is mulling, the tree is up, and January's issue will be along on the 16th-ish. Wishing you all a peaceful, joyful, well-fed Christmas. May your trifle be boozy, your mince pies plentiful, and your eggnog just the right side of questionable. We will see you next year, but not too early.
BV editor Laura Hitchcock. This month's magazine contains a lengthy article by farmer George Hosford, expressing his views on a range of topics, though mostly on corporate farming agencies that manage huge acreages for wealthy landowners. A letter from one such agency sparked quite a response from George. I asked him to give me his feelings about farmland being bought up as an investment by corporates, and what that's doing to the farming landscape of this country, and Dorset in particular.
Well, it depends entirely on what the person who has the authority to make that decision to purchase the land has in mind for it. If they just want to buy it to and then rent it or share farm it out to the highest bidder in terms of potential farm tenants or share farmers, it could be farmed very intensively, or it could be, if that share farmer chooses, it could be farmed in a very environmentally friendly fashion. But to what I said in my piece about it's the responsibility of the landowner in the first place, if you're not prepared to farm it yourself or take an enormous amount of interest in it yourself, then you shouldn't be allowed to own farmland. So traditionally, the larger landowners would have let out their land, and the main reasons for letting it out would be, the main reason for the choice of tenant or share farmer or whoever it might be would, first and foremost, you would think, well, reliable in paying the rent. Secondly, looking after the farmland as you would wish it to be looked after. Now, if you want the highest rent, you're going to get a tenant who's going to screw the land for all it's got, deplete its fertility, especially if it's a short-term let, deplete its fertility, milk it for all you can get, farm it from hedge to hedge, with no concern for wildlife or environmental matters at all. So it is entirely in the hands of the landlord to determine. And you'll find quite often that a landlord will retain an agent to do the letting for them, and maybe even let the agent make all the decision-making as regards how it should be farmed. Now, an agent, of course, in that position is going to think, am I going to go for the maximum return here, in which case I want the tenant who's going to pay the largest amount of money, or am I going to go for the environmentally responsible way? And very often the agent's agreement will be based on commission, on how much they earn for the estate. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to work out how that might end up. But in the end, it's the responsibility of the landowner, because they commission the tenant, the agent or the tenant, and then it's for them to decide how the land is farmed.
But George, if they're hiring, if they're using an agency as their intermediary, that removes them one step further back. So they are, one would assume, perhaps less likely to be interested in the fate of the soil.
Well, no, I don't think so at all. They could retain the services of an agent who understands about all those things. But it's entirely in the gift of the landowner. If they're going to buy land, I mean, you don't go buying a car without finding out a little bit about what the car is like and how it behaves, what its fuel consumption is like, and what goes wrong if you abuse it. In the same way, if you're buying farmland, you really should know a little bit about land and the responsibilities of ownership and stewardship and what stewardship means before you even buy it. And then you choose carefully who is going to look after it on your behalf if that's how you want it done. Or else you will abandon your previous career and throw yourself into it and attempt to find it out yourself.
So is there a risk then that corporate farming could actually run counter to what's being expected of farmers and the land these days? In other words, sustainability, clean water, good soil health and so on?
Oh, I think entirely so. I mean, this is a fairly controversial thing to say, and some people will come down on me like a ton of bricks, but that's what I'm implying in my piece in the BV magazine, because of what I've explained just now, the financial pressures on anybody in the chain of command from the landowner down to the tenant or the share farmer, whoever it might be, it's the economic pressure which is generally going to count first, isn't it? Probably. I'm not saying that, but I'm not saying that is right or should be allowed, because the environment, as has been the case throughout recent history, is what has paid the price for over-farming and the bad treatment of farmland and the presence of an awful lot of nutrient and soil in the water of our rivers and streams. So that's come about by irresponsible farming. Now, I dare say I'm guilty of some of that, probably, if you look hard enough, and most farmers are. Some of it's accidental, some of it is in complete ignorance, because we learn stuff and realise that we've been doing it wrong all these years, and you readjust and you recalibrate and you move ahead trying to take account of those things in the future. And I've certainly gone from one extreme to the other in my working life. But it is, to my mind, for all involved to be as genned up as they can be on the responsibility required when owning land.
Because one of the things that you didn't necessarily touch on in this article is the price of land, the fact that if farmland is viewed increasingly as an investment by corporate farming agencies or whoever, the price goes up, and so the smaller farmer might be more readily persuaded to sell their acreage, or might not be able to get a toe. Somebody who wanted to start out in farming might not stand a chance because the cost of the land is too much.
That's absolutely right. And while you've got inheritance tax, and I know there's been an awful lot of shenanigans about inheritance tax changes in this year's budget, which confirmed the changes, and last year's budget when it was first announced a year ago, a lot of landowners won't like it when I point out that inheritance tax is still only going to be levied at 20%. And not the full fat 40% on land that has to be handed down a generation when it goes through the inheritance tax mill. So it's still for burying your assets or burying your cash safely for your family to inherit. Land is still a better bet than nearly anything else at only 20%. Now, there used to be allowances, well, there still are allowances, but they're disappearing very quickly, where you had, I can't remember the expression, but you're excused from paying inheritance tax because the allowances were very, very generous. And that's what's changed, and that's what's causing the fuss. If you were landing here from Mars, and you would find that you can still be only charged 20% for any land that you wanted to pass on to your successors. They would think you were onto a pretty good number. And when it comes to size of farms and small farms giving up, that is the temptation. So the point I was trying to make was, which I should have said, was that the fact that people from outside of farming with huge amounts of money are still going to buy up farmland because of the 20% IHT allowance. That means competition for farmland is still going to be pretty acute. Therefore, that is going to keep the price of land up, which is therefore going to encourage small farmers, as you suggest, to sell up, because actually farming and growing food on land that's worth that much gives a very, very poor return on capital. And the only people who can afford to buy it are all too often the people with crazy wealth coming out of the city or wherever they've obtained it, or from maybe property dealings. So yes, that is what's happening, and farmland continues to get ever more expensive, and that drives rents on tenanted land, which there is still a third of the UK is tenanted, rented from a landowner of one sort or another, either private or institutional, and the price of land inevitably manages to persuade the landowners to think they should be due more rent in return to try and get some sort of return on their investment in their farmland. But of course, that's never going to happen. The value from your investment in farmland or land, any sort of land, is always going to come from capital accumulation, not from rent, because rents have to be funded by food production and maybe a bit of diversification if you're lucky. And the two just don't fit, which is why small tenanted operations are disappearing fairly rapidly.
And of course, then there's the increased, I assume there's then the increased temptation for farmers to sell up to developers, because the developers offer them nice fat sums of money.
They do. Well, it's a slightly different story, I suppose. There's an awful lot of land in the bank already for development, and house prices, many of us might agree that house prices are actually too high. I mean, how do the young people of today, anybody who's, I don't know, under 40, how on earth are they, unless they're in silly money territory in London, how are they supposed to expect to afford a mortgage to buy a house? I mean, the figures are out there in the media to show that far fewer people these days are able to afford a mortgage because house prices are too high. And why are house prices too high? Because the developers actually don't want to build too many houses too quickly, because they know that will depress the housing market. But taking it back to your point about the temptation to sell land for development, if you're lucky enough to own land in an area where you can get planning permission, then, well, who in their right mind isn't going to do that? Because it's ridiculous amounts of money per acre compared to its farming value. And even farming value at £10,000 an acre sounds to me pretty expensive. But you're into the millions very quickly when it's development land. So that I believe, whatever the government says about trying to increase development, the number of houses being built, it's not going to happen, because they don't have the ability to persuade the developer companies to build the houses for the reasons I was saying just now.
So, in a way, it's a bit of a double whammy for, say, a young person who wanted to purchase a small piece of land in rural Dorset and perhaps even build a house. It's going to be rather beyond their means, unless they've got a nice private income of some kind.
It would be nice, yes, unless you've got other resources. You're going to be far better off buying a little box on the outskirts of Blandford, which are just being built now, and with 400 more threatened on the top of Blandford, on top of the allotments and everywhere else, joining Blandford and Pimperne pretty much, I understand. You'll still be better off buying that sort of house rather than trying to do your own idyllic little square of countryside and do your own thing. Because A, would you get planning permission? Probably not. And B, the land is so expensive in the first place. It's a really tricky one. In many other countries, people are able to build their own houses, and you get more interesting architecture because of it. Whereas here, we're getting the most bland stuff being built all too often, which is such a shame, in these little estates with no schools, no hospitals, no doctors, no infrastructure of any kind. And it's just tacked on here and there. And
We should.
Another point worth making, here is that landowners fortunate enough to be able to sell land for development can roll over their multiple million gains into buying more land if they so wish, and you can escape paying tax on your gain, the capital gain there, because there is such a thing as capital gains tax relief, and that contributes to the price of farmland elsewhere, because you sell 8 million quid's worth of development land, you can go and buy several hundred acres of prime farmland somewhere else, and you've got more money to dispose of on that than your average person who can compete with you for the land.
Sounds like a bit of a vicious circle from what you say, George. Perhaps the Chancellor should be taking a look at that more closely.
Yeah, absolutely. I say it every time I get a chance to say it, but they don't. I don't know why. It's a complete mystery. The whole business of this, the changes in inheritance tax, just don't add up, and that is one of the reasons why. It's in the link to capital gains on land transfer. If they were seriously trying to reduce the value of land and houses, they would use a bit more intelligence about what taxes and methods they use.
In your article, George, you touched on the fact that corporate farming agencies are beginning to pull out of farming contracts. How much has the disappearance of the Basic Payment Scheme and the Sustainable Farming Initiative, SFIs, got to do with that?
Oh, absolutely huge amounts of money. Huge amounts to do with it, because the amounts of money were so considerable. That's what it's all about, Jenny, as well as the perfect storm of poor grain prices in particular. It's the grain arable sector that's moaning particularly much at the moment. I mean, dairy is down a bit, but they've had a good summer, but the prices have dropped 8 or 9 pence per litre over the last 3 or 4 months, I understand, and every litre for a farmer with a lot of cows, every penny per litre for a lot of cows counts for many tens of thousands of pounds drop in income per year. But why these companies, the corporate companies, are crying wolf now is precisely because of the loss of BPS. It was worth, for many years, it's been worth upwards of £200 a hectare for every hectare of productive farmland, and that adds up to an awful lot of money. And to have that whipped away from under our noses, especially when Labour sped up the whipping away process, which the Tories had already put in process, is more than many farmers can handle. And it's awful for us. It's awful for those companies who've been farming land on behalf of landowners as well, because one way or another they would have had an agreement how to share the proceeds of the farming. Obviously the contracting company would expect a return on their investments, and the landlord was hopefully getting a reasonable return from theirs. But suddenly you take away £200 a hectare and multiply it up by the number of hectares they might be covering, and that is a massive change in circumstances. And obviously clearly from the letter that I was referring to, that I had seen, was acknowledging that fact, and that there's just as far less in the pot to divide. And so they were ending their relationships with some farms, and they were renegotiating with others. And it doesn't surprise me at all, because it's as plain as the nose on anybody's face in the industry that, I mean, I don't know how those arrangements work, but there is less money in the pot, so it's quite understandable that it was going to need to be renegotiated. And I dare say most of the landowners will continue with new terms, and both parties will be less well off, like all of us arable farmers are having to accept right now, and look at ways of dealing with it, look at more diversification, try to be more efficient in growing our crops, and all that stuff that we've been doing for a long time anyway. But really right now, the proverbial has hit the fan, and it could well get worse. And grain prices are so poor. We're 20 quid below where we were a year ago. We didn't do very well off last year's harvest, but this year's harvest, which suffered rain after rain after rain, followed by a droughty summer, and then you calculate on top of that the current grain price, it's grim. And with no BPS and no ability to join SFI, it is awful. So it is no surprise that subject is being discussed by these organisations at all.
It sounds to me like a bit of a disincentive to farm.
It is, but it's amazing how there is always somebody who will find a way of doing it differently. And I probably ought to comment here on the county farms, the Dorset County Farms estate, which runs to 5,000 or 6,000 acres. It's about 40 farms. They've just letting five small farms now, and I'll bet you there'll be people applying. You could say there's less risk with small farms. We're talking 100 to 150 acre size farms, which are tiny compared to the sort of setups that these corporate companies are running. Much, much smaller, quite often dairy. But if they're small with low overheads and they can put in a lot of their own labour and don't commit themselves to hefty overheads, then some people will find a way of making it work. And in the meantime, in the medium term, perhaps we will see rents come down a bit. But fortunately, Dorset County Council have as their policy is to continue to operate their farms estate rather than flog it off like many counties have, and offer as the vital role that it does offer for small-scale farmers to get in at the bottom of the industry, and if they can make it work, they can work their way in. But it'll be a very different climate going forwards because of all the things we've been discussing.
Maybe, George, that will provide opportunities for enterprising people to produce and sell locally.
Absolutely right. That's a big thing. One of the, Dorset Council again, I seem like I'm praising the council. Well, there are positive and less positive sides to this discussion, but I wouldn't want to pick holes in that particularly. But they are very keen on encouraging sustainable farming, and sustainable very often means local, so that not lots of money isn't wasted on transport. So they are offering opportunities for people to do just that, to produce good, healthy food locally, and that's what they love more than anything. It has its challenges, but there are people doing it on small scales here and there. There's vegetable growers, surprising amount of veg being grown in Dorset now on small scale, but how you get it from village shop or farm shop level up to supermarket level is a different story altogether, and we could spend ages talking about supermarkets, the power of supermarkets, and the fact that most people, for an easy life, just go to the supermarket, don't care what they buy, where it comes from, how it was produced or anything. And I would implore everybody to pay attention to all those things.
I think we better keep that discussion for another time. But in a way, George, we could be beginning to turn the clock back slightly, couldn't we? If it's grown locally and sold locally.
Well, are we turning it back, or are we actually turning it forwards, Jenny?
Turning it forwards to what it was, you mean?
Well, turning it forwards to, a realisation that we shouldn't eat more than we need. We should pay attention to what we eat rather than gorge ourselves on junk food and end up shortening our lives and costing the NHS a fortune. I'd say it's very much a forward-looking approach. Because in the past, if you go back to turning the clock back, many people didn't get enough to eat, whereas far too many people now have too much to eat and of the wrong things.
And that's another topic altogether, really. I think
Well, it's all linked, Jenny, as I've said to you before.
It is all linked, yes.
I feel sure I've said that to you before. It is all very, very much linked.
Finally, George, I gather you resuscitated an old plough.
We have indeed. Yes, I've had to eat humble pie a bit, and some of my friends who know already that we've long been anti-plough because of the damage it does to the soil. But we found in a particular circumstances that perhaps it gives us the best outcome. And those who, we've banged on about trying to get your soil as healthy as possible. So, one of the rules about healthy for encouraging healthy soil is not to cultivate it any more than you absolutely need to. And ploughing is extreme cultivation. It turns the soil over down to a depth of usually 8 inches or thereabouts, breaks up the soil structure, upsets the worms, breaks all the worm passages and the drainage holes for air and water and all those important things, and leads to the oxidation of soil organic matter. But just occasionally it's possible that it is the least worst option when you're trying to establish a crop in a healthy, that's got every chance of being a healthy and profitable crop. Maybe if the plough is the only way to provide a good enough seed bed for that to happen, perhaps we have to accept that it is. And there are many experts in the field, and I'm certainly no expert, who will acknowledge that if after 10 years of healthy, reduced or no cultivation farming with reduced or no fertilizers, damaging fertilizers and other damaging stuff being done to the soil, perhaps the soil is more resilient and can stand one pass of the plough every 5 years or maybe every 10 years. If it means that you can dispose of your herbal ley, which had been in these particular fields for the last 4 years, if you can dispose of that safely under the soil where it will gradually rot down through next year and feed next year's wheat crop, then maybe it is acceptable.
I guess you'll find out in the next harvest,
Yes.
won't you?
Well, one fortunate thing is that the two fields we ploughed are quite level, so there's little risk of runoff. We managed to plough them and sow them fairly promptly, so they didn't get rained on before we actually sowed it, which would have made a right old mess. So we've not overworked it. It was one pass with the plough, one pass with the drill, and that was it. So far, it's looking great. The wheat's come up, looking healthy. And you'll need to ask me again after harvest how it did and what we're planning to do next year.
George Hosford. There's a small piece of land just outside Shillingston that's not being used as a way of turning large profits, but to benefit bees, beekeepers, and anyone interested in learning more about bees. On this piece of land is the special new bee centre belonging to the North Dorset Beekeepers Association. Ian Condon, a member of the association, brought me up to date on how work on the new centre is progressing.
So it is now virtually finished. It is finished. It's now just the nitty-gritty stuff inside, like fitting fire extinguishers and making sure we've got the right lights and connecting up dishwasher and all sorts of little things. But it's usable.
Well, what's it going to have when it's completed in terms of equipment inside?
Well, inside we've got one large room, about 9 metres by 10, which is our main meeting room, and everything will go on in there, or most of it. We've got a very nice kitchen next to it, so we can prepare drinks and well, not just drinks, we can prepare meals. So if we're running a weekend course or a day course, we can provide good meals, a couple of toilets, which you'd expect, a fairly big storeroom for general purpose, and we have what we call a honey extraction room, which is equipped with cupboards and a sink, easy clean surfaces. And the thing that most people won't have heard of is a warming cupboard in one corner.
A warming cupboard? What do you do in that? Get inside it if it gets too cold, maybe?
When you've taken honey and you store it, because we can't bottle it all at once, honey does crystallize after a while, and you end up with a solid bucket full of honey. So before bottling it, you want to warm it up. Not too hot, because if you overheat it, it will destroy a lot of its properties. So we put the buckets in this warming cupboard and leave them there for days. And it gets, I don't know what the temperature will be, but it will be in the sort of high 30s, low 40s centigrade. It's a long, slow process. So you keep all the qualities of the honey, and then it's you can then pour it and bottle it. But in this main room, we'll have 2 extractors, the centrifugal extractors, to get the honey out of the combs.
They're the pieces of kit in which you put the honeycomb inside, and then it whizzes around and all the honey flies out of the cells, doesn't it?
That's correct, yeah. So and then it comes out of a drain hole at the bottom straight into your bucket.
And from the bucket into the jars then?
Yes, it then goes. We leave it to settle for a bit and then get any air bubbles out of it, and then gently pour it into another bucket with a tap on it. And we can then fill the jars on a set of scales, so we make sure we put the right amount in each time. And then it will all be labelled. But that room will be really nice because then we can keep it clean, so it's hygienic. It's just perfect for doing what we want to do.
So purpose-built, wonderful. You mentioned, of course, that honeys will, although not all of them. I've got one that a friend gave me. And it's been in the fridge, I think, for 2 years, and it's still very, very liquid. Some honeys, of course, crystallize quite quickly, don't they? I mean, honey that's come from oilseed rape, it's not long before that becomes a solid block, isn't it?
That's correct. So if we're aware that we've got the bees are collecting from oilseed rape, as soon as the oilseed rape is over, we will then take the honey from the bees and extract it immediately, because, as you say, it sets very hard and it will set in the comb. And if it does that, it's absolutely no use to the bees, because it's pretty much like giving them solid sugar. So they need to do a lot of work to get the goodness out of it. So we're not robbing them because it's no use to them. Yeah, once we've taken it, we will then, instead of then storing it, we'll mix it in with some other honey from the previous year, and we mix it very gently, trying not to include a lot of air into it, and you end up with a creamed honey, which, if it's done right, it spreads like butter and it stays like that, and it's really nice.
I can remember when we used to import, was it Canadian clover honey, which was which was just like that. It was lovely.
Yes, yeah. That's exactly what it is.
You were saying that if you realised that the bees were bringing back nectar from oilseed rape, how can you tell? Simply by knowing that the fields are around the centre or within flying distance for the bees?
Yeah, that's the first thing. You've got to know that it's out there. If it's more than 3 miles away, then it's not really a worry. Although bees will go further because they absolutely love it. But if there's a good supply of it locally, you find everything in the hive goes yellow. They get covered in pollen, and it just covers everything. It's beautiful.
So there's more pollen that the bees bring in if they've been collecting from oilseed rape flowers.
Yeah, it just comes off there. They bring it in solid lumps, but there's always spillage, so you can see where they've been working with the oilseed rape.
So you see that colour, and that's a warning sign.
Yeah.
I gather that this new centre is eco-friendly. So what does that mean? Building materials?
That's a good question. I'm not up on the technical aspects of it, but we have got a whole load of solar panels on the roof, which we had to put on it as part of the planning permissions. We can't use that power because solar panels won't be they'll be producing lots of power when we don't need it. So we're going to have to feed that into the system. So we'll get an income from that. We've got a electric car charging point on the outside. We'll see how that goes. It's a slow one, but it might be useful.
But presumably it's all very well insulated. So from that point of view, it's eco-friendly, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's all electric heating, so we don't directly produce any CO2. It is so well insulated. I think in the summer it may well be a problem keeping it cooler.
And you'll be moving in there in the winter then.
Well, that's it. Yeah. We start our courses, some of our training courses, in January. So we will have it up and running for that.
Excellent. Now, this new centre will not just be about somewhere much better for you members of the association to gather and to keep hives, but also to bring in members of the public and let them learn about bees and their importance.
Yes, too. It's an accessible building, as you might expect, but our whole plan is, as well as using it as our training centre, is to open it up to the wider public. We'd love to get school parties, any other groups of adults who are interested. They can visit, they can see bees, and we've got a lovely great big picture window at one end, and we'll be able to have a hive or two right outside there, so that if we've got people who can't or don't want to get all kitted up into the bee suits and everything, some people just can't do it physically, but if they want to stay inside, they can, and we can have a beekeeper outside with a radio microphone, and he or she can deal with the bees, hold them up to the window so people can see them very clearly.
And people can stay safely inside and not get stung.
Absolutely, yes.
Ian, will you have one of these sort of demonstration hives, these ones that are cut in half with a glass panel so that you can actually see the interior of the hive and the activities of the bees?
We've got 2 of those, but you can't keep bees in those. when we take them to the Gillingham and Shaftesbury show, we have to go into our apiary and find a strong colony and take out 3 frames there, one of which must have the queen on it. And we set these 3 frames are sort of set vertically. So it's an unnatural situation for the bees. And of course, the bees, normally everything they do is in darkness. So opening it up to people looking at them, well, they seem to get on with it, but I don't think it's a good thing in the long run. So you can only keep them in there for 2 or 3 days. And the other thing, of course, is that once we've got them onto the show site, we've got a long tube which we connect to this hive, and that runs outside to the back of the tent. And the bees can come and go, but because they're in a new environment, so they have to learn where they are. But they are able to go out and forage and come back in again. But at the end of the final day, we let them all come back in, bung up the hole, and then take the whole lot back to the apiary and return these frames to their original hive.
And at which point they cease to be stressed and disorientated because they're back home. They're on familiar territory, aren't they?
That's correct, yeah. And of course, we have to be more than 3 miles away from the Gillingham and Shaftesbury show site. Otherwise, the bees would just fly home. But that's not a problem because we are well away from it.
Oh, well, that's excellent. Well, it all sounds very positive, Ian. So look on the website and to find further updates and an official opening in the spring.
Yeah, certainly something like that. I don't know how up to date the website is. It's a big job to keep it up to date, but it gets updated every so often. But yeah, we've got a lot of work outside to do because it's the landscapers have only just left. So we've got a vast area of soil to sow grass seed. And we actually went up there last weekend to start, and we found it was so wet because of the rain the day before that we just couldn't get on it. So we've still got the grass still.
And will you be putting wildflower seeds in there as well? Presumably you will.
Probably we might in some areas, but most of the time we can't do that because with our training courses, we might have 30 people there at any one time. They can't be tripping over long grass and things like that. So we need space around the hive. So around the hives, it will be mown. So we've gone for a grass mix, which doesn't get too vigorous. But if we find we've got areas that we don't use, then we will put some wildflower stuff in. And the other thing we've got to do is plant about 130 metres of hedge line just to surround the site. So we've gone for a mix of natural, native trees.
And you'll be quite busy then, won't you, Ian?
Oh,
you
yeah.
And you and your colleagues.
Oh well, it's all down to it's been a fantastic team effort. One of our guys, Robbie, has really taken on the role of sort of project managing, and he's done it really well. But it wouldn't have happened without the support of a huge number of other members coming in and doing this or that. And apart from the fundraising, which was the other thing, we didn't find out until, I think it was in the middle of the summer that we'd actually raised our target. The final thing was the Heritage Lottery Fund came up with the final amount of money so that we reached our target.
Beekeeper Ian Condon giving us an update on the North Dorset Beekeepers Association's new bee centre at Shillingston. The Dorset Grumbler this month in the BV is a throwback to the year 1874 and a Christmas lament.
I dare say the season of goodwill has arrived, though you would hardly know it from the state of affairs in our parish. The roads, for instance, are now so deep in mud that a man may lose a boot simply attempting to cross from the smithy to the bakery. Yet every year the parish council, a body composed chiefly of gentlemen whose boots are mysteriously never muddied, assures us that repairs are imminent. I believe these repairs are scheduled to occur around the same time as the Second Coming. As for the post, it remains wonderfully reliable, provided you do not actually require your letters to reach you. Only this morning, a parcel addressed to my neighbour Mrs. Dockett was discovered wedged in a hedge half a mile from her door, the string gnawed through by either a rat or, more likely, a disgruntled postman. Mrs. Dockett insists she will write to the Postmaster General. I wish her every joy of that. Our local traders seem possessed by a festive madness, convinced that every household requires a mechanical nutcracker or a self-stirring gravy ladle. I am certain these contraptions will soon gather dust beside last year's improved candle holders, which had the admirable quality of setting tablecloths alight. Meanwhile, the young insist on gathering in the square for what they call seasonal merriment, a pastime involving loud music, questionable dancing, and the consumption of drinks so sweet they might reasonably attract wasps in January. Naturally, they complain bitterly when anyone suggests their revelry might be heard half a county away. I recall when a simple wassail song was considered lively enough, and no one required a portable brass band to accompany them. And now the rector has declared that this year's Christmas sermon will address the perils of intemperance, vanity, and modern excess. A brave choice, given half the congregation derives its chief joy from precisely those pursuits. Still, I applaud his optimism. I believe it is the only cheerful thing I have witnessed in weeks. I do not wish to seem unseasonal. Christmas, after all, is a time for hope, reflection, and the annual rediscovery that one's relations are altogether more trying in person than on paper. I shall dutifully partake of the goose, endure the pudding, and attempt to look grateful when presented with another knitted muffler of alarming hue. But if, by the grace of all that is holy, the weather should refrain from raining sideways for an entire day, I might consider 1874 a triumph. Until then, I remain yours in wintry exasperation.
Hark back or modern times? Most definitely an invention of Laura's imagination, or maybe somebody else's. That was the Dorset Grumbler of 1874. Finally, in this December issue of the BV podcast, the heartwarming story of West Farm, which will soon be providing a safe haven and home for 6 homeless youngsters. West Farm is in a rural location in West Dorset, and it's a joint project between Salvation Army Homes and Dorset Council. It was formally opened a few weeks ago, but the first residents won't be settling in until January. Jill Cook, who's head of supported housing for Salvation Army Homes, is delighted about the project, which is a first for the charity, as they've not previously had any housing projects in Dorset, let alone one which is on a farm.
No, and we're really excited to be working in Dorset. You're absolutely right, it's our first service in that area. We do work along the southwest, so we have services in neighbouring local authority areas and regions. So we've got kind of stuff in Devon and Cornwall, just over the border. So Dorset has been very much on our radar to kind of go, we really want to develop something in that area. So when we saw this opportunity, when Dorset Council put the tender out looking for a provider to deliver this kind of this service, we were kind of, well, that's a bit of us. We definitely.
I gather that West Farm is rather unusual for Salvation Army Homes to embark on as a project, because this is the first time you've taken on a farm.
It is. It really is. But what a great idea. How amazing for having people who have like a history of trauma and issues that they need to deal with to be given the opportunity to have that space to be able to work on that. So it is really unusual to have a supported housing scheme with such amazing outdoor space. But the benefits of that are going to be incredible for the young people that are living there. So yeah, it's a really positive part of the whole service and really unusual.
There are rooms for 6 and then there are 2 flats, is that right?
That's right, yeah. So the 6 rooms are in West Farm, in that building in West Farm with the land. And then we've got 2 move-on flats that are about 5 minutes drive away. And the idea is that people will learn how to live independently in West Farm itself, and then we'll put them into the move-on properties when they're ready, and they can practice living on their own, still with support. It's a great kind of step-down approach to have quite a lot of intensive 24-hour support, and then step down to live a bit more independently, but still with the reassurance of having that support when they need it. Jill,
are you throwing the homeless who will be living in West Farm, are you throwing them in at the deep end? Because you're going to be putting them in rural Dorset, and I'm assuming that maybe they come from an urban environment.
Well, it's a local service, So all the referrals come through the local authority. So they're all from that area. It's a service for people who are from Dorset. The service will be part of the community. So somebody won't be just dumped in to the middle of rural Dorset and left there. The service has 24-hour staff. Part of the whole approach is to engage people with other services in different parts of the area. So absolutely, the fact that people are able to live in the countryside is a real benefit, because there will be a lot of stuff going on at that service in itself. But also part of the work that the team will be doing is engaging them in other parts of the region, and how people are living in a rural environment anyway. We need to think about how we can support them to get around, full stop. So part of that whole support will be that approach. How do you get to different parts of the area if you have a job somewhere and you can't afford to buy a car? So part of the support will be around how those challenges are overcome.
So it will be familiar territory for the people living there. Have you actually selected the occupants yet, or not?
No, so we're currently working on that with the local authority. We're working on our referral processes, how we assess people who need the service, and our team. So we've just got a service manager, and she's just recruiting our team at the moment. So she's working on that. So we are expecting to move people in early January. Our service manager is at the moment just working with the local authority, assessing a number of young people who we think might be suitable for the accommodation. So that's a joint process between our team and the local authority. So early January we'll have our first young people moving into the service.
Well, given that it was announced on the news recently that there's now an annual increase of around 8% in homelessness in this country, such schemes become really ever more important, don't they? And you can really only sort of cater for the very, very tip of the iceberg, can't you?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. There, you can see, as particularly in the cities and areas, homelessness is massively increasing, and it's becoming more visible. It's less visible in rural areas, but that doesn't mean that it's not there. It is absolutely there. And we need this type of scheme to break that cycle and provide more than just a roof for somebody. To addressing somebody's homelessness issues is more than just giving them a roof over the head. To be able to break the cycle completely, we need lots of support, shift in mindset. Many of the young people that we'll be working with within West Farm won't have had very much stability or kind of engagement or encouragement in their lives previously. The service will give them a real sense of safety, so that the staff can empower them, think about what their strengths are, and help them move towards independence. And those kind of things are really, really necessary to break that cycle of homelessness.
So how will you choose the residents? What criteria will you apply?
So there's a really clear criteria that the local authority set as part of the tendering process and part of the whole approach to delivering the service. So the young people will need to have been homeless, be at risk of homelessness, and have support needs around that. So it's quite likely that they may have been in accommodation before and that's failed. They may have been in care in the past, and moving to independence from the care system is always really difficult, and that's not always easy, and it often doesn't always work very well. So it will very much be about, you're homeless, you've got support needs. But what we also need to do as part of that assessment process is we will make sure that we're matching people up within the service. So we've got to think about how people can live together. So we're thinking about managing risk, managing support needs in a shared environment. So we have to match people to be able to live in that environment as well.
Challenging, of course, because you're going to be introducing a bunch of strangers to each other.
Absolutely. And if you imagine, I don't know if you were a student, if you go and live in student accommodation, it's a very similar kind of thing. You go living with somebody who you don't know. But the benefit of this kind of scheme is that because the staff are there 24/7, what tends to happen is a real community is created. So people end up with real significant support from their peers. And when that happens, they start to share kind of success. They build on their own success. They encourage each other. And then that kind of cycle starts to shift. So they start to believe in themselves, they start to be aspirational for each other. And that whole peer support makes a massive difference to somebody's future prospects.
So much easier, really, Jill, to put a group of people who've gone through similar experiences together because they have those shared experiences, don't they? So they can move on from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And peer support is really important, particularly when you can kind of think of how important it is to have a positive role model in your life. So if you've got a peer who's doing really well, then that just is just a fantastic inspiration for other people.
Because, of course, all of these residents will be very fragile and vulnerable, won't they?
They will. They will. So they'll all have had issues that they will be dealing with. They'll have likely had some kind of adverse childhood experience or some trauma. And part of the work that we'll be doing is to help them overcome the barriers that have held them back in the past. So things like low confidence, low self-esteem, and not believing in themselves. And that's kind of a really important thing to kind of celebrate those little steps. That's what our team will be doing, and really empowering people and changing people's mindset, playing on people's strengths rather than thinking about what people can't do. We really focus on what people can do, and we're aspirational for our residents.
In a way, it's a bit like encouraging a flower to open.
Absolutely, that's a really good analogy. And we encourage people to grow. Our staff work as coaches, so they coach people. We do things with people, enable them to do things for themselves rather than do things for people and to people. And that different approach is really important, and it really makes a difference.
Now, obviously, since it'll take people different lengths of time to learn to become independent and confident and feel that they can get out into the big wide world again, this will be their stay at West Farm will be like an open-ended book, won't it? You won't give a finite duration, finite time of stay.
Well, what we tend to do is we start talking about moving on the minute somebody moves in, because what we don't want people to do is become reliant on the service. The whole point of the service is that it is a temporary accommodation. It's not forever. But what we don't want people to do is they do get comfortable because it's their home for the time that they're there. But we don't want people to become institutionalised and rely on that environment. So the minute people are moving in, we're talking about moving out again. And the whole focus and the goal of everything is to look at how we can move people on to their own independent living, wherever that may be. So whether that's through the training flats or directly into their own accommodation. Some of we run similar services in other regions, obviously not on a farm, but in different regions. We move people onto all sorts of alternative independent opportunities. So it might be in a shared flat, then we might do some work matching people who live in our service. We might move them on together, might be to a local authority independent flat. So there's all sorts of opportunities for people to move on to, but we don't kind of give people a set time, because then people tend to go, oh, I've got 2 years here, or I've got 12 months here. But we try and focus on actually what does that look like for you as an individual. It's all person centered. Somebody might be there for 2 months, and that's absolutely fine. We might be able to help them manage all the issues that they need to manage, break down the barriers that they're facing within that time, and that's brilliant. Some people might need longer than that, which is why we're really focused on the individual rather than a specific time period.
So given that you say from the word go, this is not a permanent solution for you, so don't become too comfortable. But of course, comfort is something that is definitely provided at West Farm. It looks beautifully furnished, and I gather that you've had donations of furniture and so on. It looks like a very nice place to stay.
It's beautiful. It really is lovely. IKEA donated all the furniture, and that's just amazing. So what's happened with that is we've been able to create a really homely, welcoming, calm environment. The idea is absolutely that. It needs to be home for the young people that are living there. If you think about developing outside of kind of where you're at now, you need to feel safe, you need to feel welcome, you need to feel secure, you need to feel supported, and having a safe space and a welcoming and warm home is really important. It's kind of the basis for everything else. So we're really grateful to be able to go into this building that's been beautifully refurbished. It looks fantastic. The furniture's absolutely gorgeous. People will just move into something that looks really nice. And that makes people feel valued. It makes people feel cared for. It makes people feel wanted. And that's just a really good starting point to be able to shift somebody's mindset and start to build a future.
And Jill, since you are hoping to get all these youngsters to a point of independence, you'll also be hoping that they will be able to get jobs afterwards.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the key things that our team will be doing is maybe working with local businesses, looking for work experience opportunities, enabling our residents to get involved in volunteering and community groups and kind of building their skills and experience so that they can be a real part of the community and also then generate and learn skills to get into permanent work. That's the whole point of the service, to enable somebody to live independently. You can't really be living truly independently if it's not financially viable. So part of the work that our team will be doing is around financial inclusion and what that looks like for people and enabling them to think about moving into permanent work.
Absolutely. Well, now, finally, Jill, since this is a first for Salvation Army Homes, actually having a farm as premises, if it proves successful, do you think you'll be looking at farms elsewhere in the country?
That would be just amazing, wouldn't it? I would absolutely love to say yes, absolutely. But that depends on is there money available to do that? We've been really lucky here. Dorset Council have been planning this for an awful long time. They already had this building sat empty, this resource. They, went out and found the funding to be able to do this. All credit to that team because they've done a brilliant job. Long before we came along, their concept of using the building for this was all Dorset Council, and it's a brilliant opportunity. But it would be great for us to use this as an example of how using a support accommodation scheme with that additional outside space made much more of a significant impact in people's lives. And we'll definitely be doing some research as we go along, looking at what impact the outside space is having and comparing it to some of the work that we do in other areas that doesn't have the same kind of outside space. And we'll see what difference it makes.
Well, Jill, given that all the evidence, academic, anecdotal, personal, points to the fact that as human beings, we need a connection with the outside world, with the green world, the fields, the natural world. It seems to me that to look for further farms or places, even with a large garden, would be absolutely wonderful.
Absolutely, definitely. And wherever we do develop new services, one of the things that we do look for is the outside garden space. But I guess there's not many properties that come with an acre of land. If only that was the case. But yeah, it's definitely on the top of our list for something that looks really good.
Well, maybe there'll be something up there in Lancashire where you're speaking to me from.
Yeah, maybe. I'll keep my eye out for it.
Jill, thank you so much for talking to us today for the BV podcast.
No worries.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jenny.
Lovely to talk to you, and I wish you a Merry Christmas. And thank you again very much.
Indeed,
Thanks.
absolutely.
Bye-bye then, Jill.
Nice to talk to you, Jenny.
Jill Cook, Head of Supported Housing for Salvation Army Homes. Which brings us to the end of this December 2025 issue of the BV podcast. It just remains for me to wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Bye-bye from me, Jenny Devitt, and see you in 2026. Goodbye.